Hey guys, Richard here with Richard C. Howard and Associates. This is the Government Sales Momentum Podcast. In this podcast, we are going to talk about strategies and techniques small businesses can use to sell their products and services to the U.S. federal government. All right, let's get started. Hey, Richard here, and thanks for listening to the Government Sales Momentum Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about what it takes for a small business to sell to the government. So just wanted to dispel some myths that are out there and really what you need to be looking at in order to properly set yourself up for government sales. So first and foremost, the timelines for government sales are a little bit longer, in some cases a lot longer than commercial sales. Typically, if you're thinking about selling to the government, you need to plan on a 12 to 24 month timeline before you're on contract with the government. Now, there's certainly exceptions to that. If you sell, for instance, products that are, if you sell tools or if you sold kind of, when I say low dollar products that are under $10,000, you could potentially be selling those a lot faster within a couple of months. However, if you are, an IT services company, if you develop software, if you're looking at larger contracts, if we're talking about anything really over $10,000, the timeline for that is going to be a little bit longer. And there's a reason for that. Now, not to dissuade you, those contracts can be very lucrative and they can be very stable as compared to some of your commercial clients. But it just takes a little bit of extra effort to get there. So mindset, it's going to take commitment and it's going to take consistent engagement. You're not just going to register to sell to the government or get a GSA contract and watch the sales roll in. That's not how it works. So once you have the mindset of, hey, this is going to take some time, but, could be a very profitable arm of our business, then we can talk about some of the initial steps, right? So first, you need to be registered to sell to the government. Now, you can register through sam.gov. And there are some things associated with that. I'm not going to get into all the details of what registration is. You could certainly reach out to us and we could talk about that. But you're going to need a DUNS number. You're going to need a cage code. And the site will walk you through how to get a lot of those. The next thing you're going to be thinking about is, what type of small business am I? Are you qualified for some of the certifications that are out there that can give you an advantage in bidding on contracts? Some of those certifications, and I'll do an episode on these, but so let's see, service disabled veteran owned business, right? That's what my business is. If you have if you're woman owned, you could register for the woman owned small business certification. And each of these certifications are associated with a certain percentage, usually between 3 and 5% of all federal sales, discretionary spending is going to be set aside for those type of small businesses. A very powerful one is 8A. It takes, there's a process to register for that. You'll do that through the Small Business Association. But 8A makes it a lot easier for the government to provide sole source contracting options for you. There's also HubZone. And there's some also certifications that you can self-certify as, like minority-owned small business, things of that nature. So once you get your certifications down, once you are registered to sell to the government, next thing that you're looking at is putting a capability statement together, which is essentially a one-page marketing document. And the reason you put that together, it's kind of an industry standard. It's not typically going to sell your business. That's usually, as an acquisitions officer for the DoD, I certainly never put a company on contract because of their capability statement. However, I can tell you companies that met with me, if they didn't have one, it told me that they either were brand new or really didn't understand the process. It's an industry standard. You need to do it. It should be one page. Again, we'll do an episode just on capability statements and the type of information that's going to be in there. And you can find a lot online too. So this is all to say, you're getting yourself set up to sell to the government. You understand what the timeline is going to look like. And now you need to have a plan, right? And really that planning starts before the certification. But, the first step is, does the government buy what you sell, right? And almost always the answer is yes. I used to say the only company that came to me that I couldn't find a purchase for or a requirement for was a company that sold cannabis, and of course, federally, that's illegal. However, since I have been saying that, opportunities actually just popped up for cannabis in the research realm. One of the agencies was doing some research associated with that. So even there, we're seeing some requirements and some opportunities. So typically the government buys almost everything, right? And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? The federal government is the single biggest purchaser of goods and services in the world. If you think just about the Department of Defense, they're not just buying weapons and aircraft and the maintenance trail that's associated with those. But if you think about it, every military base is kind of like a mini city. So everything associated with a regular city, whether it's food or the BX, which is kind of like a store, they're selling clothes and they're selling soap and different products. They have golf courses and bowling alleys and movie theaters and police and hospitals. And so whether you're in pharmaceuticals or you're selling hammers and nails or you're a construction or you're providing IT services or admin services, which just about every organization needs, the government's probably making purchases there. The key is to really find out which agencies are buying what you sell, right? So before you go out there and you get a GSA contract vehicle or you put your plan together, especially as a small business, it's really critical to understand the one or two agencies that you're going to focus on, and really goes deeper than that. You want to know the agency, you're looking at the sub-agency, so if it was Air Force, the DoD would be the agency, the sub-agency would be the Air Force, and I keep using IT services, but we might look at Air Force Lifecycle Management Center within the Air Force. So you see, we keep drilling down to which agency makes the purchases, and we can review historical spending. That's all publicly available. Then we go to the sub-agency, so we say, okay, Air Force is where we're going to focus because either we have a network there or we've sold to them before, or they're just making a ton of purchases in the area, in the industry that I'm in. And then we're looking even further, who really has acquisition authority, or who has the authority to make purchases, because the government's a huge place, but it's really only a very small percentage of offices actually have the authority to purchase anything, major purchases. So it's really essential to understand who you're actually targeting, who actually has the authority to make a purchase, or else you could be wasting your time if you're setting up meetings and whatnot. Once you know that, now you have the beginning, I would say, of a game plan. This is how now you're going to start going after some of that work by focused on who you're selling to, and now you're going to identify opportunities before they become requests for proposals, which is how the government will compete typically a contract. The government will have requirements and funding, and now, let's say it's to build a building. Now they're going to put that out there, and typically in the form of an RFI or sources sought, say, hey, what companies out there can answer this problem? Who can do this type of building? And there's going to be certain requirements associated with that, and then you can respond back. I can, you raise your hand, hey, we can do that. And by the way, maybe you're a service disabled veteran-owned business, so you can recommend that set aside. You're going to suggest different things that you would do for that building based on what that RFI sources sought, asked for. And then eventually that turns into a request for proposal. And that's the government officially saying, hey, we're going to do this. This is exactly how I want you to put a proposal together, if you can handle it. And then they'll review that, and then they're going to make their decision. And of course, that's a timeline, right? From an RFI or a forecast to becoming an RFP and then making that decision and hiring the company, that could be 18 months, right? So it's a long time. That could also be a $10 million contract, right? So potentially a big contract over a period of time, but it's really essential that you're focused, you're influencing the requirements on that, hopefully creating a relationship with the acquisitions team ahead of time, and then getting to that final contract. Some other things that we need to think about. So that really covers, registration, what those timelines look like. Another thing that you may want to consider is what your team looks like right now. So if you're a small business, it's just one or two of you, three of you, and you don't have commercial sales, you need to be prepared for how you're going to sustain over that timeline when you're trying to get, especially your foot in the door for the first time on a government contract. If you're already set up and you have strong commercial sales, that's great, because that can sustain you, and you can have somebody dedicated to the federal piece over that initial timeline where you're trying to get your foot in the door. Now, look, there are a lot of strategies on how you're going to sell to the government. A big part of it's teaming and subcontracting. There are programs to sponsor new technologies with small businesses, which can be actually a little bit quicker than that timeline I talked about. There's a lot of different opportunities. It's a lot of different strategies. But at the end of the day, selling to the government is a relationship game. And we'll talk about that in future episodes. But in order to build some of those relationships, a lot of companies give up before they get there, because building a relationship with the government is a lot different than trying to build it with a commercial company, right? So a lot of times you just can't go up and knock on the door, or you don't even have the phone number to call in some cases to figure out who you need to talk to. So developing those relationships is going to be critically important, and we'll cover that. But I just wanted to get into this, for this episode, just talk about, what it takes, what the mindset needs to be. A lot of the myths out there, like I said, are, hey, I'm going to register for the government and I'm going to start making sales. And typically not the case. A lot of companies go out and they just start writing proposals on RFPs. It can work now and then, but most companies that are consistently selling, that's not what they're doing. And honestly, in a lot of cases, the acquisitions team have a pretty good idea which companies are qualified to go on contract before that RFP ever goes out. They need to know that companies can handle the problem set they're trying to solve. So knowing that, another thing, if you're thinking about a GSA contract vehicle, that can be a great mechanism for you, a great contract vehicle, a great way for the government to hire you. However, if you go out, that's going to be an investment of time and probably money. And the government is not just going to hire you because you have that vehicle. If you go out and spend that time getting GSA, you need to know the work's not just going to come to you. That's a mechanism, and that can inspire trust and confidence with the government for your company. But you want to make sure that the organizations you're trying to sell to actually use that vehicle substantially to really validate you going after that vehicle at all. So just a couple things that we wanted to talk about. We're always here to help. Our website's richardchoward.com. You can fill out a consultation form, contact me directly. I'll put my email in the notes. Any questions you have, feel free to reach out and we can talk about it. Great. All right. Well, have a good day.